So the ACC is currently having meetings down in Florida. There are several rumors floating around on social media about conference realignment and a potential exodus of programs from the ACC. I made a video earlier about the potential for Clemson to leave the ACC for the SEC or the Big Ten. And this is just something that I think is going to happen. I think it's inevitable. The programs in these two conferences are going to bring in double the revenue compared to the ACC. You know, programs like Clemson or Florida State have the ability to compete with these programs, but they're going to get buried by revenue. In that video, I've talked about the grant of rights, the TV deals that these conferences have. The ACC's is terrible. The Big Ten, the SEC, they're about to start making upwards of $70 million. And though no one's sure how Clemson is going to leave the ACC, I think most people understand that it's just going to be a reality soon. The SEC and the Big Ten are obviously the premier conferences in college football already. There's no doubt about that. It's been that way for a really long time. Texas and Oklahoma joined the SEC. Southern Cal and UCLA joined the Big Ten. That's just going to make matters worse. I would imagine Oregon and Notre Dame probably going to be joining the Big Ten pretty soon as well. These two conferences are just massive, and they're about to rake in a whole bunch of revenue. And college football is really just becoming about those two conferences. And so Clemson's going to have to leave the ACC, or they're going to get buried by those two conferences, by teams like Ohio State, Michigan. Once they start raking in triple the revenue that Clemson can, we're obviously going to get buried. There's no way we can compete. Now, obviously, I think geographically and historically, the SEC clearly makes the most sense. Ton of potential rivalries at play if we join that conference. Obviously, South Carolina being the in-state rival. Georgia is a rival as well. But given the geographic location or proximity to these other programs, you can create a rivalry as well. Who knows? Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee, Florida. Who knows what can come of consistent matches against these programs, even teams like LSU. Honestly, though, I do think the Big Ten would be kind of cool. You know, I wouldn't mind making trips to, Ohio State, Michigan, even all the way out to Southern Cal. These are legendary stadiums. I'd love to experience a Clemson game in them. But, speaking solely from a football perspective, I would love the transition to the Big Ten. I wouldn't hate it. I think it would be really cool if Clemson joined those big programs up north and out west. But obviously, for really other sports, it doesn't make any sense. Football, it kind of makes sense because you only have to, have 6 away games a year. But other sports just doesn't make any sense, right? Can you imagine a Clemson baseball series traveling out for the weekend in Los Angeles? That'd be kind of weird. Or a soccer matchup in Indiana. Just kind of weird, doesn't make any sense. So obviously the SEC is probably going to be the destination. It makes the most sense geographically and historically. And at these meetings, we don't really know what was said, but we do know that the commissioner basically put a gag order on the athletic directors. And so obviously I think something was determined in that meeting. We're just not allowed to find out about it yet. But I think this summer is probably going to be big, and I think we're going to find out something this summer. College football is coalescing around the SEC and Big Ten. That's just where all the money's at. And so it sounds like Clemson and potentially 7 other programs in the ACC have to decide to leave the conference. And if you really look at the ACC, teams like Clemson, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, NC State, Virginia Tech, Virginia, they make sense. I think all of those programs can probably leave to the Big Ten, to the SEC, and be just fine. They generate decent amounts of revenue. They have pretty relatively large football stadiums, investment in their football programs. They can probably make that transition. But we're going to need more. We're probably going to need a team like Louisville, a team like Pittsburgh, average-sized football programs that can probably benefit from leaving the ACC, maybe going to the Big 12. We're probably going to need them to come on board for that potential exit. But there's also a bunch of programs in the ACC where it makes 0 sense for them to leave. At least half the conference would be in serious trouble if the ACC broke. I mean, what would Wake Forest do, for example? Or, Syracuse or Boston College. These are programs that do not generate enough excitement for football. Average football attendance is probably less than 40,000. Wake Forest could be even less than 30,000. I don't even know. They don't have the alumni base. They don't have the boosters. They don't have the investment really into that sport. Football's obviously the cash king, so there's no way the Big Ten and the SEC would really want Wake Forest, Boston College, Syracuse. I mean, Duke kind of just really has basketball. Do you really want them to join your football conference as well? And so those teams could be in serious trouble. I think for them, it makes a lot of sense to stay in the ACC right now. If that magic number is 8, if we need 8 teams to leave the ACC, Louisville and Pittsburgh, we're really going to have to convince them to jump on boards. The schools I mentioned, Clemson, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, those schools, they can leave and they'll be fine, but we really have to convince somebody else too as well. But again, I expect this decision to be made this summer. I think we'll find out within a couple months before the football season begins. There have been talks about unequal distribution of money, the idea that Clemson would earn more than Syracuse if, let's say, Clemson were to go to the playoffs and win the national title. Right now, Clemson and Syracuse would earn the same amount if that were to happen. Let's say Syracuse went 2-10, Clemson won the national title. They would actually make the even amount of revenue. That doesn't make sense. So there's been talks about unequal distribution to really benefit the higher achieving teams like Clemson or Florida State. But even if that were the model, that still wouldn't be enough compared to the SEC or the Big Ten. I mean, these programs about to start generating upwards of $70 to $80 to $90 million in revenue annually. And even if unequal distribution was a thing, we're still going to get buried by those programs. So staying in the ACC, it just can't happen. The answer's obvious. Clemson's got to leave. SEC or Big Ten, it's only a matter of time before the announcement is made, in my opinion. Now, obviously, I think the SEC is going to make the most sense, and truthfully, I can't wait. I've been wanting Clemson to join the SEC since I was a kid. Right? Since I started paying attention to Clemson religiously, I've always wanted us to play in the SEC, and I think it would be funny, right? I can't wait for Clemson to win an SEC title before South Carolina does. Can you imagine Clemson entering the SEC and then instantly winning a conference title, even though South Carolina's been in that conference for so long? I mean, that would be so funny. South Carolina fans could never live that down. And honestly, for fans who criticize Clemson and don't think we could compete in the SEC, because I've heard that literally my entire life, there's no way we can compete in the SEC, is what they say. I mean, just think of it this way. I've heard the criticisms of Dabo being he's just a CEO type of coach. I've heard that in his entire career. He's been criticized for not being X's and O's brilliant, right? He's obviously not a play caller, and he never was a play caller. He was just a wide receiver coach that became the head coach at Clemson. And so he's always been the CEO type of coach. And if that's true, right, if that's a true argument, maybe Dabo isn't this X's and O's genius. I doubt he is. Maybe he was never offensive coordinator, and maybe he wouldn't have been a successful offensive coordinator. So maybe he is just a great CEO type of coach. He's a great CEO, right? I mean, Clemson's won 2 national championships. Outside of Alabama, we were the best team in the 2010s decade. And so can you imagine if he really is just a CEO type of coach? I just want you to imagine giving him more revenue. Give him double or triple the revenue. He's clearly great at running the Clemson business, so to speak. So that would seem to imply he would only run it better with more revenue. I mean, imagine him taking Clemson earning $30 million and now giving him $70 million. If he's this CEO coach, you can't deny that he's a bad coach. He's obviously a great coach, one of the best coaches in college football. Now give him double, triple the revenue. I mean, don't you think he can compete with that? Because I certainly do. I think Clemson would benefit massively from joining the SEC. Obviously, the games every week would be tougher, but we would benefit massively. And so maybe this is my orange-colored glasses speaking. I don't know. Probably is. But I think Clemson can compete in the SEC. And I can't wait for the announcement to finally get made. Clemson in the SEC is a long time coming, and I can't wait. Go Tigers.